I never expected my 35th birthday to become the mark of the cruelest betrayal of my life. All morning I was busy in the cozy little kitchen of the old wooden house on Willow Street, the house I had spent 5 long years restoring from a crumbling wreck into a place filled with memories. I had scrubbed every brick on the exposed wall by hand, replaced each window pane myself, and brought the backyard garden back to life with rows of lavender that bloomed bright purple in the summer. This wasn't just a house. It was my heart. The simple birthday party was something I had planned myself, just a few familiar faces in the family. My parents, uncles, my brother, Daniel, and of course, Ivy, the cousin who always showed up at family gatherings with a smile as sweet as honey and a cocktail dress that didn't quite match the warm, intimate vibe of the celebration. "Olivia, open your gift. This one's really special," my mom said with a big smile, her hands trembling slightly as she handed me an envelope wrapped in shiny silver paper, tied with a red bow like it was the most precious gift in the world. I smiled back, not suspecting a thing. The room was filled with laughter and conversation, the scent of vanilla cake still lingering in the air. I untied the bow, peeled back the foil wrapping, and pulled out the stack of papers inside. My eyes quickly scanned the bold, black-inked heading, short and cold. "Eviction notice." The air in the room thickened. My hand froze mid-air, my mind spinning. "What is this?" I whispered, barely recognizing my own voice. My father wouldn't look at me, his head bowed as if in shame. My mother blinked rapidly, avoiding my gaze. Daniel took a small step back. And Ivy... She smiled, but not her usual gentle smile. It was the smile of someone who knew everything, waiting for the moment another person crumbled. "Olivia, we know today isn't the ideal time, but it's time we were honest," my mother said, her voice barely above a breeze. "What do you mean? This is my house." I shot to my feet, the chair scraping harshly against the wooden floor. "I renovated every brick, every door in this place. I poured my life savings into it." Ivy set her wineglass down and stood up slowly, her voice calm and weightless. "But the house is still under your aunt and uncle's name, Olivia. On paper, it was never really yours." I turned to her. "You knew? You're siding with them?" "I'm just helping the family make a smart decision," she said, smoothing the silk of her dress. "This neighborhood's hot right now. It makes sense to sell." I let out a dry, hollow laugh. "So this is the birthday present you all prepared for me? An eviction notice? And you turned my home into a market listing." My father still said nothing. My mother stepped closer, reaching as if to take my hand. "You have 45 days to get things in order. We'll help with moving costs if you need." I pulled my hand away like I'd touched fire. "I don't need anything from anyone. I need answers." "How long have you all been planning this?" Ivy raised her chin, unfazed. "About 3 months. I've already spoken to a few potential investors. They're interested in the size of the lot and the prime location. This old wooden house? Old." I choked on the word. "Every corner, every brick in here is my work. I've lived and loved this house with everything I have." Daniel spoke, his voice low. "Liv, maybe you should calm down. We can talk about this later." No later. I want the truth." "Right, now." No one answered. The room sank into an unbearable silence. I stepped back, heart pounding, eyes scanning the familiar faces that suddenly felt like strangers. "Get out of my house," I said, my voice low but firm. "Olivia." I said out, now. One by one they left the room, none of them daring to look back at me. Only Ivy remained, facing me. "You're blowing this out of proportion," she said with a shrug. "And you just made me lose all faith in family." I walked to the door and opened it. Out. Ivy gave me one last look, her eyes glinting with something icy. "You're fighting a battle you can't win. Don't let emotions cloud your judgment." The door shut behind her. I stood there for a long time, eyes still fixed on the paper in my hand. In all my years, I had never felt so hollow. But in that silence, a thought sparked. If Ivy thought I would give up that easily, she didn't know me at all. I sat motionless in the armchair by the window, the late afternoon sun slanting through the sheer curtains, casting a soft orange hue across the floor. The eviction notice lay silently on the coffee table, like an open wound that hadn't stopped bleeding, in a room still echoing with the warmth of laughter from that morning. I should have cried, should have been furious, but the only thing I felt at that moment was suspicion. Ivy. Since when had that seemingly harmless cousin become the mastermind behind pushing me out of my own home? From the casual comments about property value to the scrutinizing looks I once mistook for admiration, all of it now formed the perfect pieces of a carefully hidden scheme. I picked up my phone, my fingers dialing almost instinctively. The first person I needed was Emma, my best friend from college, the one who'd pulled me through sleepless exam nights, heartbreaks, and the craziest home renovation projects. Olivia? Emma's voice came through after 3 rings. Are you okay? No, I answered bluntly. I need you here. Bring your laptop, and if you still have that stack of old renovation permit files, bring those too. Less than an hour later, Emma showed up at my door, hair tousled and her backpack stuffed. As soon as she saw me, she didn't ask a thing, just gave my shoulder a firm squeeze, walked in, pulled out her laptop, and began searching through folders organized with obsessive precision. Got it, Emma said, turning the screen toward me. Every permit, blueprint, and city approval. I backed them up ages ago. Good thing I never deleted them. I stared at the screen. These files could be the key. Ivy said the neighbors complained I was renovating without permits. She showed my parents some documents, but no one would let me see them. Emma frowned. Could they be fake? I nodded, and if they are, then she's executing a much bigger plan. That night, I texted Daniel, my brother. We used to be close, but ever since he got married and moved out, the distance had grown. Still, I knew if anyone in the family had any sense left, it was him. I need to meet you. Urgently, I wrote. Daniel replied a few minutes later. Tomorrow morning, Cornerstone Cafe, 8 o'clock. The next morning, I arrived 10 minutes early, sitting by the window with a cup of hot tea. Daniel walked in looking exhausted like he hadn't slept all night. I didn't waste time. You knew about the eviction, didn't you? Daniel nodded, avoiding my eyes. Yeah, about 2 weeks ago. Ivy told Mom and Dad that you weren't fit to manage the house, that there was a risk of legal trouble because of unpermitted work. All lies. I placed Emma's folder on the table. Here's every permit, legal, verified. Daniel flipped through a few pages, his face slowly draining of color. So, she lied to me too? And I believe there's more to it. I looked him straight in the eye. Ivy wants the house, not for herself but to sell. Probably to some development project. Maybe someone she's dating? Daniel frowned. His name's Max Harper. I've never met him, but Dad mentioned he's into real estate investment. Exactly. I'm going to dig deeper, but I need your help. If Mom and Dad believe her because of documents, I'll prove she forged them. Daniel sighed. I'm with you. Better late than never. Back at home, Emma and I began tracking leads. She had an old classmate named Chloe who worked at the city's land records office, now overseeing construction permits for my area. After a few calls and a post-work coffee invite, Chloe agreed to meet at the public library. She pulled out a thick file and flipped to the page I needed. Here's the petition about noise and unauthorized renovations supposedly filed by a neighbor, or at least the copy that was submitted. But the strange thing is, there's no original, no official case number. I frowned. You mean, it's not in the system? Exactly. And the name listed as the complainant doesn't match anyone on Willow Street's resident registry. I double-checked. This might be a fabricated document. Emma snapped photos of every page, her eyes lighting up. We've got signs of forgery. I felt a chill run down my spine. If Ivy had actually faked documents to manipulate my parents, this wasn't just a family conflict anymore. It was a serious ethical and legal issue. We left the library as twilight fell. The streetlights flickered on, reflecting off the familiar Willow Street Historic District sign. I paused at my gate, gripping the folder tightly. This house wasn't just where I lived. It was the story of my growth, the proof of my dedication and love poured into every brick, every window frame. And now, it was under threat by someone who once called me sis. I looked over at Emma, my voice steady. If Ivy thinks she's smarter than me, she's made a huge mistake. Emma nodded, a faint smile playing on her lips. Game on, Liv, and we're going to win. Darkness settled over Willow Street, but inside me a light had just been lit. The light of truth, and I was going to bring it into the open, no matter what. A light drizzle was falling when Emma and I returned to the city the next morning, our hands clutching the folder full of new leads. It was time to piece them together into a bigger picture. Ivy didn't just want to take my house. She was preparing to demolish it. That afternoon, Daniel took us to meet one of his contacts, a man named Marcus Bell who worked at the city planning office. Marcus was the cautious type, but after reviewing the documents Chloe had confirmed as fake, he frowned deeply. "This is strange," Marcus said, flipping through the detailed plans with professionally drawn lines. "I seen this version during a closed-door meeting a few weeks ago." "Who's the developer?" I asked, a gut feeling beginning to simmer. Marcus typed a few lines into his computer and turned the screen toward me. Under the logo of a construction company called Harper & Stone Group was the heading, Proposed Luxury Apartment Complex, Location, 197 Willow Street. I froze. That was my address, my house. Emma looked at me, eyes wide. "Max Harper, Ivy's boyfriend. He's the Harper in Harper & Stone." I tried to keep my voice steady. "Do they have any documents signed by my parents?" Marcus paused, then nodded. "There's a land survey approval form with signatures from Mr. and Mrs. Rickman, your parents." I stood still. But my parents never told me about any of this. They still think I broke the law, let alone signed off on selling the land. Marcus frowned. "The signatures look odd. Might be copies. If you want, I can have the legal department take a closer look." "Please," I cut in, "as soon as possible." Marcus agreed to help. On the way home, I pulled out my phone and started typing a message to my mom, but deleted it before hitting send. I wasn't ready to face them. Not yet. Not until everything was clear. That night, Emma stayed over like we used to during college. We sat by the fireplace, going over every blueprint, signature, and seal. "This, notary seal," Emma said, pointing to the survey form. "Whose is it?" I held the paper up to the light. Under the round red stamp were the words, "Notary Public, Elizabeth Sterling." I frowned. "Sterling. That's Ivy's last name, right?" Emma opened her laptop and searched. "Here it is, Elizabeth Sterling, Ivy's biological mother. She used to be a notary, but she retired almost 2 years ago." Then, how did she notarize a document filed just weeks ago? I asked, feeling heat rush to my temples. Emma looked at me, serious. "If that seal was used after she retired, that's falsifying a notarized document. That's a criminal offense." I let out a long breath. Ivy was taking this too far. The next morning, I was about to drive to meet Marcus when I saw my windshield shattered. A large rock lay in the front seat, still covered in damp dust. Wrapped around it was a small piece of paper, scrawled with a shaky handwritten message. "Back off while you still can, Olivia." My heart pounded. I looked around, but the street was empty. No one suspicious in sight. I called the police and, while waiting for them to arrive, I texted Emma and Daniel to come immediately. The police took my statement and collected the rock as evidence. They advised me to install security cameras and to report any further incidents. I nodded, but I knew. This wasn't about paperwork anymore. Ivy had started sending warnings through action. 3 days later, I received an email from Marcus with the subject, Signature verification results. I opened it, palms sweating. After comparing with the original signatures on the Rickman's property and tax documents, we have determined the signature on the land survey is forged. I clenched my fist. That was our first piece of solid proof. Emma called me as soon as she got the copy. It's starting, Liv. We need a game plan. That evening, in my kitchen, Emma, Daniel, and I mapped out a strategy. The plan. Gather all the evidence. Fake documents, forged notarizations, shady land surveys, and Ivy's connections to Max Harper and the real estate development firm. We also agreed we had to stop them from demolishing the house before the truth came out. Emma suggested reaching out to Leela, her friend who worked at the Historical Preservation Office, to check if my house might qualify for protected status. If it did, they couldn't touch it without city approval. Just then, the doorbell rang. I stepped out and froze. Sitting on the porch was a cardboard box with no sender listed. I opened it. Inside were full-color photographs, shots of every corner of my house. The kitchen, the living room, the stairwell where I used to hang my grandmother's photo, even the window I had just repainted last week. Every one of them was marked with a bright red X. No note, none needed. The message was crystal clear. I looked at Daniel. They've been inside the house. He snatched the box from my hands. No way, you locked the doors, right? Of course. I clenched my fists, trying to stay calm. But they have a key. Probably from Mom. Daniel pulled out his phone and called our mother immediately. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I watched his face shift with every second. When he hung up, his expression was dark. Ivy borrowed the key yesterday, told Mom it was to take measurements for her engagement party. And Mom believed that? I asked, my voice hoarse. Daniel nodded. She's suspicious now, but it's too late. I walked toward the window, looking out over the backyard. The garden, where my grandmother once planted rows of lavender, was now cloaked in evening mist. We need to move fast, I said, my voice low but firm. If Ivy wants a war, I'll show her. I'm not someone who goes down easy. I turned back to the only two people still standing by me. The campaign starts tonight. We're not just protecting this house. We're exposing the truth. Peace. Fear still lingered inside me, but for the first time in weeks, it didn't overpower my resolve. I wasn't alone, and I wasn't going to lose. 2 days after the break-in, I sat in the office of my lawyer, Sarah Holden, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with a calm voice who had helped me with property documents in the past. This time, she wasn't just my legal advisor. She was a key ally in the battle I was about to face. Sarah flipped through the documents I'd gathered from Marcus, Chloe, and even the X-marked photos I'd taken as evidence. This is a pattern of deliberate behavior, she concluded, tapping her finger on the survey contract copy. Forged signatures, improper notarization, and clear organized fraud. If we can prove Ivy and Max colluded for personal gain, you won't just keep your house, you could take them to court. I nodded, but deep down I knew one thing. Winning in court wouldn't be enough. I needed a blow Ivy couldn't recover from. A truth bomb dropped right where she believed she stood in the spotlight of her own glory. The night before the engagement, where Ivy planned to introduce Max to family, investors, and wealthy friends, she had rented the Bellevue Grand Hotel, a lavish venue in the northern part of the city, to host a perfect debut evening. I would turn that party into a full reveal, and to do that, I needed someone on the inside. Someone who knew Max and Harper and Stone's operations better than anyone else. That person appeared unexpectedly. Lena Harper, Max's younger sister. I'd met Lena briefly back when I still got along with Ivy. She was quiet, usually hanging on the sidelines of their gatherings. But today, she reached out to me directly, leaving a brief message. Olivia, I know what Ivy's done. Meet me at 5 at Bean and Birch. I arrived on time. Lena was already seated in the corner, dressed in a charcoal gray coat. her sharp features betraying the tension in her posture. She gestured for me to sit, then handed me a USB drive. "This has everything," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Blueprints, emails between Max and Ivy, plans for clearing the land, including your house." I held my breath. "Why are you helping me?" Lena looked me straight in the eye. "I used to believe Max was a good person, but he and Ivy only care about power and image. They've turned our family business into a tool to hide their wrongdoing. I don't want to be part of it anymore." I nodded. "Thank you. This means a lot." "There's more," Lena said, pulling out a thick printout from her bag. "This is the party plan. Ivy rearranged the guest list, and you're not on it." I laughed. "Of course. She knows I won't stay silent. But I have a way to get you in." Lena slid a formal invitation across the table, still blank. I was in charge of delivering backup invites to the press. I kept this one. I took it and thanked her once more. Inside me, determination had turned into a slow-burning fire. I was no longer just fighting for my house, but for justice, for truth, for everyone who had ever been dismissed, deceived by expensive dresses and fake smiles. That night, I sat in my study with Sarah and Emma, and we prepared everything down to the last detail. Sarah compiled the documents into a complete dossier: forged evidence, falsified signatures, plans to demolish the house, internal company emails, and most notably an audio recording provided by Lena where Ivy said, "After the engagement party, no one will be able to stop us." "You're bringing all this to the party?" Emma asked, her voice tinged with nerves. I nodded. "Not just bringing it. I'm revealing it in front of everyone. Ivy wants to shine in the spotlight? Then let the truth shine right on her." Sarah handed me another USB. "I've backed everything up here, and I've also sent a copy to the media's legal rep, in case something unexpected happens." I gave a soft smile. Can never be too careful. The next morning, I received an anonymous message. "Stop now, if you don't want things to get worse. There are things you can't control, Olivia." I showed the message to Sarah. She looked at me calmly and said, "This just means they're scared." By evening, I dressed carefully. A simple, elegant black dress and a pearl necklace that once belonged to my grandmother. It felt like a charm, reminding me of where I came from, the love I poured into that home, and the reason I couldn't walk away. I stepped into the grand lobby of the Bellevue Grand Hotel, chandeliers casting golden light across the polished marble floor. Soft music played, glasses clinked, and laughter floated through empty congratulations. Ivy stood at the center of the ballroom, draped in a shimmering white gown, her arm looped around Max's. They looked like a magazine cover. But her gaze faltered the moment she saw me. I smiled, holding up the invitation. "Sorry, I couldn't miss this party." She tried to hide her surprise behind a smile. "Olivia, I didn't think you would—" "Excuse me," I cut her off, walking straight into the heart of the room. I lifted a wine glass and tapped it gently. "If I may have everyone's attention before dinner begins." All eyes turned toward me. The room paused for a breath. I took a deep one of my own. "This isn't a toast," I began, eyes drifting toward Ivy and Max. "It's the truth everyone deserves to know. About this party, about that couple, and about a house under threat because of greed." Ivy stiffened. Max gripped her hand. I reached for the USB Sarah had just handed me and plugged it into the large screen behind me. "Please watch." The lights dimmed. The screen lit up. And the storm was about to begin. The light from the big screen cast a glow across the ballroom. All eyes focused on the first image, a detailed development blueprint for a luxury condo complex named Willow Heights, with a clearly listed address, 197 Willow Street. A wave of murmurs swept through the room. A few guests whispered to each other, others stepped back, glancing at Max and Ivy as if waiting for an explanation. I stepped closer to the mic, my voice calm but firm. "This is a property currently owned by my family, and it's where I've lived for over 10 years. The plan to demolish that house and replace it with this luxury complex has never had my consent. All the so-called approvals you've seen are fake. Next, the screen displayed a series of documents, among them the land survey with my parents' forged signatures and the notary seal belonging to someone who retired last year. A sharp knock on the table came from a middle-aged man in the front row. Mr. Randall Morris, the project's lead investor. Forged documents? Do you have verifiable proof? I nodded and turned to Sarah, who stepped onto the stage. Sarah spoke clearly and firmly. We have confirmation from the city's legal department. All signatures, seals, and survey approvals fail to match official records. The notary, Elizabeth Sterling, MS, Ivy's biological mother, hasn't been licensed for over a year. This puts the entire documentation into the category of criminal fraud. Ivy stood frozen, her face drained of color. Max stepped forward, gripping her hand, ready to speak, but I didn't give them the chance. I'm not done, I said, eyes fixed on the screen. The next piece of evidence played through the speakers. An audio recording. Ivy's voice rang out, cold and deliberate. Let them think Olivia's breaking the law. Once the house loses legal protection, we can buy it for next to nothing. After the engagement party, everything will be in our hands. Then Max's voice chimed in. I've cleaned out all the internal files. No one will trace it back. The ballroom fell silent. The air turned heavy as lead. Max turned to Ivy, his face no longer composed. You recorded our conversation? Ivy whispered. I don't know who did. I looked at them, a faint smile forming on my lips. Maybe you don't, but someone close to you does. Lena stepped out from the crowd, her eyes sharp as ice. I sent the recording, because I won't let you and Ivy drag our family through the mud. Max's jaw dropped, staring at his sister like he was seeing her for the first time. Lena, what are you doing? Ending this game, Lena replied. Ending all of it, Sarah continued. We've submitted all the evidence to the Department of Planning, the notary office, and the authorities. Police have received formal complaints for document forgery, attempted property fraud, and intentional damage to private property. As she finished, 2 plainclothes officers entered the ballroom. One stepped up to Ivy and said, Ms. Ivy Sterling, you are under investigation for document forgery and conspiracy to commit fraud. We ask for your cooperation. A stunned wave rippled through the room like a brewing storm. Ivy turned to me, her eyes filled with rage and reluctant resignation. You'll regret this, Olivia. You have no idea what you've just stepped into. I held her gaze, calm. And you have no idea who you underestimated. Max hadn't been handcuffed, but the investors had already started leaving his table, some without a word, others casting looks of disdain. Randall Morris slammed the project file onto the table and stood up coldly. Harper and Stone has lost all credibility with me. Sarah leaned toward me and whispered, We should go. The rest is in the hands of the authorities now. I nodded, but before leaving I paused in the center of the room, facing my parents, who had arrived late and witnessed the final moments. My mother's face was pale, my father frozen in place. I'm sorry I had to do this publicly, I said, my voice no longer angry but filled with sorrow. But without the truth, I would always be seen as the one at fault. My mother stepped forward and took my hand. Olivia, I had no idea Ivy could do this. We're truly sorry. I gently squeezed her hand, then turned to leave. Outside the hotel, the cool evening air brushed against my skin like quiet reassurance. Sarah handed me a folder. The court will review everything in the coming weeks, but with this evidence, your win is almost certain. Lena stepped closer, placing a hand on my shoulder. Thank you for fighting. For the truth. I looked out toward the city lights in the distance, a slow smile spreading across my face. I just did what was right. Because I won't let anyone take away the place I call home. Peace began to return to my heart. The battle wasn't completely over, but the web of lies had been shattered. And for the first time in months, I was certain of one thing. The house still stood, and so did I. 6 weeks after that unforgettable engagement party, spring had truly returned to Willow Street. The trees lining the sidewalks began to bud, and the scent of lilacs from the neighbor's garden danced in the breeze. Everything seemed to slow down, as if life was giving me a pause to breathe after the chaos. My house, or rather the home I fought to protect, still stood strong, even after being threatened by greed and deceit. But what I didn't expect was that the very storm meant to tear it down would bring me a new family, a community I never knew I belonged to. Emma still stopped by every day, bringing coffee, notebooks, and ideas to renovate the house, not to sell, but to live in. Daniel came by on weekends with his wife and kids, helping me repaint the faded white fence and plant asters in the front yard. Lena, once just a quiet shadow at a lavish party, had now become a vital part of this healing journey. After the scandal, she officially left Harper & Stone and helped launch a local heritage preservation fund with a team of community activists. "Olivia," she said one afternoon as we inspected the roof, "this place isn't just your memory, it's part of this city. We want to start here." I was speechless when she handed me a bronze plaque engraved with small words. "The Rickman House, a living legacy of Willow Street." My throat tightened. No words were needed. I knew I wasn't alone anymore. The person I least expected also appeared one quiet morning. Max Harper. No suit, no arrogance. Just a man standing at my gate, looking lost. "I'm not here to apologize," he said plainly, "because I know sorry doesn't undo what I've done." I crossed my arms in silence. "But I want to make it right," Max continued. "I've resigned from the company. Lena and her team are building a preservation program, and if you'll allow it, I'd like to support it financially." I looked at him for a long moment and finally nodded. "Not because I forgive you, but because I believe everyone deserves a chance to start over. As long as they really start from zero." We shook hands, and I felt lighter. Not because Max had changed, but because I was no longer bound by bitterness. As for Ivy, the media moved on after she received a suspended sentence for document forgery and attempted fraud. No one in my family mentioned her again. My parents relocated to a quiet suburb, away from the noise. One afternoon, as I was sorting through old photo albums in the living room, my mom stopped by. She silently looked around the house, filled with memories. "I found this in Grandma's old box," she said, placing a worn wooden comb in my hand. "She used to brush my hair with it as a child. She always said this place wasn't just a home, it was the heart of the family." I said nothing. I just opened the window where I used to sit for hours as a child, reading in the sun. And in that moment, I knew this house would live on, not just in me, but in everyone who stepped through its door with sincerity. A few weeks later, I hosted a small gathering. Not fancy, not flashy, just a warm backyard dinner with the people who stood by me through the storm. Under the glow of string lights, everyone gathered around wooden tables, sharing food, laughter, and stories never told. Lena brought a large framed photo to hang from the cherry tree. My grandmother, standing in front of the house, her face radiant. Emma whispered to me, "You should make this a tradition, a day of hope, the day you took everything back." I nodded, eyes lifted to the tree full of lights. "A day of return." Daniel raised his glass and called for silence. "Let's toast to Olivia, who didn't just save a house, but restored our faith in the truth." Glasses clinked. I lifted mine, clinking gently with those around me, then whispered to myself, "And to those who dare to rise." That night, after everyone had gone, I sat alone on the front steps. The spring breeze danced through my hair. I looked around. Every brick, every window, every familiar footprint, all felt alive. I knew with certainty this wasn't just where I lived. This was where I belonged. And no one would ever take that from me again. From the fight to save my childhood home, I learned that sometimes loss and betrayal become the stepping stones to something far more precious: courage, truth, and the people who truly stand beside you. A home isn't just a roof over your head, but a sanctuary of memories, love, and resilience. And now I haven't just kept my home. I've reclaimed myself, stronger, wiser, and unafraid of losing anything ever again. What do you think about Olivia's journey and all she's been through? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to follow the channel to keep discovering more heartfelt, inspiring stories about family and life behind the front door.